There's a photograph from 1943 that captures something rare in Hollywood history. A wedding day. She's radiant in her dress, confident, already carrying the poise of someone who'd conquered Broadway stages. He's lean, hungry, still rough around the edges, a man with everything to prove and nothing to lose. Her name was Diana Dill, and on that November day in Las Vegas, she was the more successful one. She was the established actress. He was Kirk Douglas, formerly Isser Danielovich, a struggling actor who'd just changed his name and was desperately trying to make it in an industry that chewed up dreamers like him every single day. If you lived through the 1940s, you remember what it meant when a woman with real credentials, real talent, real Broadway success chose to marry a man who was still fighting for his first significant role. People talked. Theater insiders wondered what she saw in him. But Diana Dill saw something no one else could see yet. Raw ambition, relentless drive, and a hunger that wouldn't quit until he reached the top. Before we go further into this story, if you're interested in more untold Hollywood histories and the complex truths behind legendary figures, please subscribe to our channel. We bring you the stories that shaped an era, told with honesty and depth. In 1943, Broadway was Diana's world. She'd performed in productions that mattered, built a reputation that opened doors. Kirk Douglas was 27 years old and had appeared in exactly 0 films. Their courtship was quick, intense, fueled by wartime urgency. Diana saw past Kirk's childhood poverty in Amsterdam, New York, where he'd grown up as Isser Danielovich, son of Russian Jewish immigrants who barely scraped by. She saw the fire, the man who would stop at nothing to transform himself. And she believed in his potential more than her own present success. Diana continued performing while Kirk auditioned relentlessly. She was the breadwinner initially, the one with connections. Kirk came home frustrated after another rejection. But something was shifting. Kirk's intensity was translating into performances that couldn't be ignored. By 1945, he'd landed his first Broadway role, and then came the break. Producer Hal B. Wallace offered him a contract with Paramount Pictures. When Kirk moved to Hollywood in 1946, Diana came with him, pregnant with their first son, Michael. Just as Kirk's career was exploding, Diana's was contracting. Kirk's first film, The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, showcased what Diana had seen, that magnetic intensity. Hollywood noticed. Between 1946 and 1949, Kirk appeared in 11 films. The transformation was complete. He developed that signature dimpled chin into a trademark, learned the publicity machine. Diana was home with baby Michael, then pregnant again with Joel, born in 1947, watching her husband become someone she barely recognized. Kirk's breakout came in 1949 with Champion, playing a ruthless boxer who destroys everyone on his climb to the top. The performance earned his first Oscar nomination. People who knew them both noticed something unsettling. The line between Kirk's on-screen characters and his off-screen personality was blurring. What happens when the man you believed in, when he was nobody, becomes somebody who doesn't need your belief anymore? Diana was living that question by 1950. Kirk was making film after film. Young Man with a Horn, The Glass Menagerie, Ace in the Hole. He was everywhere, commanding bigger salaries, becoming one of Hollywood's most bankable leading men. Diana knew about the temptations. How could she not? Hollywood was a small town despite its glamour, and wives always knew. There were late nights that stretched too late, co-stars whose names came up too often, the feeling she was competing not just with other women, but with Kirk's ambition itself. She'd given up her own Broadway career, given him 2 sons, been there during the lean years. Now, in the golden years, she was becoming invisible. Kirk was not deliberately cruel. He was simply a man entirely consumed by his own ascent, who'd grown up with nothing and was determined to have everything. The poverty of his childhood had created a need that couldn't be satisfied. He loved his sons genuinely, would maintain relationships with them throughout his life. But in those years of meteoric rise, Kirk was learning what many stars learned. You can have the career or the marriage, but having both requires a balance that hunger doesn't allow. By 1951, Diana had reached her breaking point. The marriage that had started with such hope in 1943 was irrevocably broken. They'd lasted 8 years, through the struggle and into the success, but the success was what killed it. Kirk's stardom had created a life Diana no longer recognized, with a man she no longer knew. The divorce was filed quietly, processed efficiently, barely noticed by the press, because Kirk Douglas was too valuable a commodity for studios to let scandal attach to his name. Diana got custody of Michael and Joel. Kirk got his freedom and his career. Hollywood got to keep its rising star unencumbered by messy, personal complications. Here's what happened next, and this reveals everything about Kirk Douglas, about Hollywood, and about that golden era. Diana largely disappeared from Kirk's official narrative. When he gave interviews about his personal life in later years, he spoke extensively about and by Diana, the woman he married in 1954, and became the love of his life, the marriage that lasted 65 years until his death in 2020, and was positioned as the woman who gave him stability, who understood him. The publicity machine had little room for the first wife. But Kirk wasn't uniquely villainous. He was ambitious to the point of obsession, prioritized career over relationship, likely wasn't faithful. But he also supported his sons financially, maintained connections with them, helped Michael's career. He wasn't trying to erase Diana out of malice. He was simply moving forward with the single-minded focus that had gotten him out of poverty. In Kirk's worldview, shaped by deprivation and hunger, you didn't look back. You kept climbing. Michael Douglas, born in 1946, grew up witnessing his father's transformation from struggling actor to Hollywood titan. In later years, Michael would speak carefully about his father, acknowledging both the drive that made Kirk great and the personal costs. He saw his mother's sacrifice and his father's relentless determination. Michael inherited that drive, channeled it into his own legendary career, and notably maintained his marriage to Catherine Zeta-Jones, perhaps learning from his father's first marriage what not to do. Joel Douglas took a different path, working as a producer. Both sons maintained relationships with Kirk throughout his long life, attended family gatherings with and by Diana and their half-brothers. The blended family functioned the way Hollywood families often do, with professional courtesy, genuine affection mixed with old wounds. Diana Dill continued acting after the divorce. She appeared in television shows throughout the 1950s and 60s, The Phil Silvers Show, Bonanza, The Virginian. She never achieved Kirk stardom, but she worked steadily. She remarried in 1956 to Donald Webster, and that marriage lasted until his death. She lived to 92, dying in 2015, 5 years before Kirk. In later interviews, she spoke about Kirk with weary understanding, acknowledging his talent while making clear the costs of being married to that level of ambition. She'd loved him when he was Isser Danielovich, and she'd lost him when he became Kirk Douglas. When Kirk married and by Diana in 1954, he was 37 and already a major star, and was a sophisticated French woman who'd worked in publicity, who understood the film industry, who knew exactly who Kirk Douglas was when she met him. Crucially, she wasn't more successful than him. Their marriage lasted 65 years, not because Kirk had fundamentally changed, but because and entered with her eyes open and the power balance clearly established. She knew about the ego, the demands of being Kirk Douglas's wife, and she decided those costs were acceptable. Diana had married potential and married achievement. Kirk himself, in his later years, spoke openly about his shortcomings as a husband regarding N. He acknowledged the affairs, the selfishness. The 1996 stroke humbled him, forced him to slow down, made him reflective. He wrote books about his life, his Judaism, his mortality. But even then, Diana rarely entered the narrative. She remained a footnote, quickly mentioned and moved past. The marginalization of Diana Dill in Kirk Douglas's story reveals crucial truths about Hollywood's golden age. It shows how success was built on the invisible sacrifices of women whose contributions were erased. It demonstrates how the studio system protected valuable male stars while allowing women to disappear. It illustrates the ruthless momentum required to rise from poverty to stardom, and how that momentum crushed everything in its path. But it also shows something more nuanced about Kirk. He wasn't unique in his treatment of his first wife. Countless Hollywood stars had similar stories. What made Kirk's situation notable was Diana's success at their marriage. The fact that she was initially the more established one. Her erasure wasn't just about gender dynamics. It was about the complete reversal of their fortunes and how uncomfortable that made people. Kirk Douglas lived to be 103 years old. He died on February 5, 2020, having achieved everything he'd set out to achieve. 3 Oscar nominations, an honorary Oscar in 1996, iconic roles in Spartacus, Paths of Glory, Lust for Life. He'd broken the Hollywood blacklist, built an entertainment dynasty through Michael, amassed wealth beyond imagination. In those final decades, after his stroke, Kirk did reflect on his life's costs. He talked about the ego, the intensity. He praised him for staying. But Diana remained in the shadows of his narrative. To understand Kirk Douglas fairly requires holding 2 truths simultaneously. First truth, he was a man of extraordinary drive and talent who overcame genuine poverty and discrimination to achieve greatness in one of the most competitive industries imaginable. His work ethic was legendary, his performances unforgettable, his impact on cinema undeniable. He helped break the blacklist when it was professionally dangerous to do so. He created opportunities for others. He lived with fierce independence and artistic integrity. Second truth, he was also a man whose ambition left casualties, whose first marriage failed because success mattered more than partnership, who allowed the woman who believed in him first to be erased from his story because that narrative was cleaner, simpler, more mythologically satisfying. Kirk Douglas wasn't a villain. He was a product of specific circumstances. Crushing poverty, immigrant experience, the ruthless Hollywood studio system, the gender dynamics of his era, who made choices that prioritized his ascent over everything else. Those choices hurt people, Diana most of all, but they also created the Kirk Douglas that millions admired, the performances that still resonate, the career that inspired his sons and countless others. The tragedy isn't that he was evil. The tragedy is that the system required those choices, rewarded that ruthlessness, and ensured that the cost would be borne primarily by women whose stories didn't matter enough to remember. Perhaps the truest thing we can say is this: Diana Dill's legacy isn't in the film she appeared in or the Broadway stages she performed on. Her legacy is Michael Douglas. She raised him, shaped him, gave him the foundation that allowed him to become one of Hollywood's greatest actors and producers. She did that as a single mother for significant periods, without the resources Kirk later commanded. Michael's success, his stability, his ability to maintain a long marriage. These things reflect Diana's influence as much as or more than Kirk's genetics. She was there during the formative years, providing the steady presence that Kirk, consumed by his own ascent, couldn't provide. In the end, Diana Dill's story matters not because Kirk Douglas was uniquely terrible, but because her erasure was so complete and so typical. She represents thousands of women in Hollywood history who believed, sacrificed, supported, and were forgotten the moment they were no longer useful to the legend being constructed. Her story reveals the price of Golden Age glamour, the cost of creating icons, the reality behind the photographs of handsome couples at premieres. She was there at the beginning, when Kirk Douglas was still figuring out how to be Kirk Douglas. She saw the transformation up close. She paid for it with her career and her marriage. And then, like so many first wives before and after her, she was written out of the story because legends don't have complicated first chapters. They have triumphant narratives that begin conveniently after the messy human complications have been dealt with. Kirk Douglas died having achieved everything except, perhaps, a full reckoning with the costs of his achievement. Diana Dill died having given up much but gained something too: her dignity, her sons, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when Kirk Douglas was nobody, when he had nothing but hunger and dreams, she was the one who believed. That belief cost her everything and gave her nothing of what she deserved. But it was real, and it mattered. And even though Hollywood forgot her, the truth remains. Kirk Douglas became Kirk Douglas in part because Diana Dill believed he could, back when no one else did. That's not the whole story, but it's the part that matters most, and the part that got erased fastest.